Hello everybody and welcome along to this video. Mr. Johnson teaches Macbeth, Act 1, Scene 3, part of the quick revision series running through each and every act and scene from the play. A reminder, this is your GCSE English literature we are talking about. You'll find this in Paper 1, Section A, the Macbeth question. So without further ado, let's move on. A quick scene summary for you then. A key scene in the play, this one. What happens is the witches are creating a curse at the start of this scene, and before that then Macbeth and Banquo are returning from the battle, and they come across these witches as they're coming back from fighting the Norwegians. The witches make predictions about Macbeth's future. One of those predictions ends up with him becoming king. But also to Macbeth they say, "Thou shalt be Thane of Cawdor and then king." They also predict a great future for Banquo's children before they disappear. They don't say Banquo's going to be great, but they do say his children will. And then Macbeth and Banquo receive news and are given news that Macbeth is now the Thane of Cawdor, which means that part of that witch's prophecy has come true, which then intrigues him further. So that's the breakdown of the scene very quickly. The key characters you're going to see in this scene, so the witches will be present, Macbeth and Banquo, as we heard, coming back from the battle, and then later on we get Ross and Angus. Both of those are Thanes coming in, so like Macbeth is Thane of Glamis, Ross is a Thane and Angus is a Thane as well. And let's get going. So Act 1 Scene 3, it starts again with thunder, a bit like Act 1 Scene 1 did when we last have the witches. It almost becomes a cue for the audience to know that they're coming. It's a heath, like a deserted area. And then the first witch asks, "Where hast thou been, sister? Where have you been?" The second one says, "Killing swine." And in some ways that really is trying to make the witches seem like really bad and typical witches to the audience. That's the sort of thing you might think is typical behaviour for a witch. And then the third one asks, "Where about you?" And basically we get this story from the first witch about how she saw this woman eating some nuts and she asked her for some, or said, "Give me them." And the witch said, "No, go away, you witch," and insulted her. So to revenge this, the witch then plans to turn into a rat and follow the husband of this woman off to sea. If you're following me there, the witch is upset with the woman and she's going to curse her husband in revenge for not being given these nuts. Which is a bit bizarre, but again, it all establishes these witches as like the evil characters that Shakespeare wants them to be. And then they say how they're going to help her on the way. They'll give them a wind to help her travel. And it basically says how she's going to drain this man of his life, won't let him sleep for weeks, and just make his life thoroughly, thoroughly miserable. And then later on, down at the bottom there where my second arrow is, she shows them that she's taken a pilot's thumb, so somebody who would have been steering a ship, and sort of like, yeah, got it. It's really quite grim and horrible. Sort of got it off somebody who's wrecked as homeward he did come. So there's been a shipwreck and this dead body, and she's gone and taken this pilot's thumb from a dead body. Again, all of these lines so far, these 30 lines that we've seen so far, just really trying to establish these witches as nasty and evil characters. And then there's a drum off stage, so a drum within. And the witches, or the third witch says, a drum, Macbeth doth come." So they've started speaking in rhyme again. And when they're doing this, it sounds like they're chanting and they're creating spells. In many ways, this rhyme helps them sound more evil, which is perhaps what Shakespeare is trying to achieve with it. And then we get more chanting and talking in rhyme and rhythm. "The weird sisters, hand in hand, posters of the sea and land, thus do go about, thrice to thine, and thrice to mine, and thrice again, to make up 9. Peace the charms wound up," before Macbeth and Banquo enter. Now they don't see the witches at first. And Macbeth says, "So foul and fair a day I have not seen," which is really interesting because it mirrors the witches' lines from the first scene. They talk about fair is foul and foul is fair. And then Banquo says, "How far is it to Forres?" And then suddenly he sees the witches and he describes them for us in those lines. So between line 40 and line 47, 48 there, he's describing them. He says how they look not like the inhabitants of the earth. So they don't look like something that lives on the earth, yet they are on the earth. "Live you, or are you aught that man may question?" So are you alive, or are you something which is sort of strange? "You seem to understand me, because each one is putting her choppy finger laying upon her skinny lips." And then one of my favourite descriptions of the witch comes up. "You should be women, and yet your beards forbid me to interpret that you are so." I think you look like women, and yet your beards make me think that you're not women. So it's a great bit of description. Macbeth then says to them, "Speak if you can, what are you?" So he demands of them, and then we get these things, two of them are predictions. We get the first witch saying, "All hail Macbeth, hail to thee Thane of Glamis," which he is the Thane of Glamis. All hail, Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor. All hail, Macbeth, thou shalt be king hereafter. Now, the last two lines that I've highlighted in yellow there are predictions of Macbeth's future. There's dramatic irony in that second prediction, the Cawdor one, because we know as an audience from Act 1, Scene 2 that the king is going to make him Thane of Cawdor. So suddenly we can see how the witch's predictions are going to come true. Macbeth, however, how does he react? Well, we only know from what Banquo says. If it was watching the stage production, we'd be able to see the actor, but we can't. We've got the script. He says, "Good sir, why do you start and seem to be afraid of things that do sound so fair?" And then Banquo goes on to question them. He talks about how they've given my noble partner, Macbeth, you've given him like great prediction of noble having royal hope, like great predictions of something to become with king. And he can't seem to speak, he says. I love this line, "If you can look into the seeds of time and say which grain will grow and which will not, speak to me." He's like saying, if you can predict the future and look and decide which seeds will grow and which ones won't, like you can tell the future, tell me mine. And then they say, "Hail, hail, hail! Lesser than Macbeth and greater, not so happy yet much happier. Thou shalt get kings, though now be none." So all hail Macbeth and Banquo. So again, the witches are using double meanings. It's a real theme for them during the play. They sort of tell you something, but they don't give you enough detail. And they say how Banquo won't be king himself, but will have kings, like get kings, which means almost essentially his children will go on to become kings. Now, I've highlighted in yellow the next bit, which is the imperatives that you can see going on there. All the way through Macbeth's bit, he wants to know more now. He can't believe that how these predictions could be true. Stay, tell, say, speak. He's talking to witches, and yet he's demanding information from witches, which shows he really has been really intrigued by this. They've made him curious and wants to know more, because, as I've said on the bottom there, Macbeth believes the Thane of Cawdor is still alive. But they disappear. Off they go, they disappear into the air, and they're basically left wondering what's gone on. Like my first arrow at the top there, Macbeth wishes they had stayed. It shows his curiosity and possible desire moving into later. Would they had stayed is the line he says, which shows he's intrigued. I mean, that could be a key line you highlight in your for your notes. Banquo wonders in line 85, 86, 87 there whether they've eaten on the insane route. Are we going crazy? He doesn't seem quite as convinced as Macbeth does as to what they've seen. Macbeth says to him, "Your children shall be kings." And Banquo replies, "You shall be king." To which Macbeth, they almost seem to be joking about the predictions. It's almost like, yeah, they're brushing it off. It doesn't really matter too much. But then enter Ross and Angus. Now, they have been sent by the king to give Macbeth the news. So here it comes now. Ross says at the beginning, essentially as I put on the arrow there, "King Duncan was impressed when he heard of what you did in the battle. Really impressed." I've missed a few lines out there and then jumped down to Angus's because that's sort of not such important really for what we need to know. "We are sent to give from our royal master," that's the king, "thanks, to herald thee in his sight, but not to pay thee. So we're here for good news, but don't expect any money from us." And then Ross says, he asked me from him to call you, Macbeth, Thane of Cawdor. In which edition, hail, most worthy Thane. And I've highlighted worthy in pink there, like I have for other key lines, just to show it's another word how Macbeth is being boosted up by the words of others around him and how good he is. The king has made Macbeth Thane of Cawdor, I've said there, which means now one of those witches' prophecies has come true. Now Banquo says, what, can the devil speak true? So he's sort of comparing the witches to the devil. Can they really be true? Because witches were associated with the actions of the devil and of evil. But it really shows Banquo distrusts these witches. Whereas Angus then says, Macbeth says, the Thane of Cawdor is alive. Why do you give me these borrowed robes? They're not mine. They're the Thane of Cawdor's. Don't give me that title. But essentially then Angus goes on to explain how the old Thane of Cawdor was a traitor and was going to be executed. And then we move on. Macbeth, now this is a key stage direction there. It's aside. So he doesn't say that. That's an instruction to the actor. He's talking to one side. It means that we can hear his thoughts and no one else on stage can. He says Glamis, which is he's Thane of Glamis, and Thane of Cawdor, the greatest is behind, meaning essentially the best is yet to come. And then he says to Ross and Angus, thanks for your pains, and talks to Banquo. Do you not hope your children shall be kings? So basically, look, my first predictions come true. Don't you hope that your children are going to become kings? Banquo replies with some really, really key lines. Macbeth is showing that he's now really interested in the witch's prophecies. Banquo is much more intelligent and wise, I would say is a good word. And that's why I've put on that bottom arrow. I'll read the lines in a second, but Banquo shows the wisdom, and that he says that dark forces may sometimes tell you truths to make you believe them, and then they go on to betray you. So he says, oftentimes to win us to our harm, to trick us to being hurt, the instruments of darkness, I love that line, like things that are trying to do bad things, the instruments of darkness, like the witches, they tell us truths, they win us, like make us believe them, with honest trifles, and then betray us later on. Now, Macbeth talks again to one side. And he basically says, like I got my first arrow, this supernatural soliciting, these ideas, they can't be bad, but they can't be good either. He can't see how this can be a good or a bad thing. And yet, as the next arrow suggests, the idea of murdering King Duncan really upsets him. It says there, it unfixes his hair and makes his seated heart knock at his ribs. Horrible imaginings, he says on line 145 there. It shakes my single state of man. He really doesn't like this idea, yet he's quite keen on becoming king. And then he goes to one side, if chance will have me king, while chance may crown me without my stir. Essentially, the first arrow says, I could do nothing and still become king. Let chance do it. I'm not going to do anything. Let's leave it to fate to sort it out. Then there's a little bit of conversation before we have at the bottom where Macbeth basically says to Banquo he wants to speak to him more about these witches' predictions when they've had some time to think about it. Let us speak our free hearts to each other, he says. So let's speak openly about it. And then at the very bottom, come friends, exeunt. Off they go, exit the characters. Key themes in this scene, the supernatural definitely comes up again. We've got the witches casting their spells and being very evil at the beginning, but then also making the prophecies, the predictions for Macbeth. You've got the deception and duplicity, those double meanings going on there, and sort of hiding the truth from Macbeth. And also this idea of destiny starts coming up. Was Macbeth going to become Thane of Cawdor anyway? Was that his destiny? Or is there something to do with the supernatural and the witches? We just don't know at this point. Some quick revision questions which I won't read through for you now. I'll let you have a go. Pause this screen, have a go. They will just test your understanding of this scene and see how much you've actually taken on from watching this video. And then finally, a bigger question to consider. How does Shakespeare present the supernatural in this scene? I've put some bullet points there. How do the witches come across as untrustworthy? So what does Shakespeare do to make them come across that way? What does Macbeth's reaction show about him? And what does Banquo's reaction show about him? Because with that in mind, you've got choices and decisions being a real key theme that could be put to this scene as well. Like in this picture, you've got a sort of a split. You've got a fork in the road, you call it, and you've got a decision as to which way you go. Now, in some ways, Macbeth and Banquo at this point take very different paths. Macbeth says he's not going to do anything, but ultimately we know he goes on to follow and believe in the witch's predictions, whereas Banquo does not. He stays true and stays loyal to the king. So just think about this scene being a real sort of splitting point between the two characters and the decisions that they ultimately make. Excuse me. And that's the end of this. I tried to make it as quick as I can. It's quite a long scene and therefore hard to reduce down to much more. But hopefully you found this video of use to you. And good luck with your further studies of Macbeth. When it comes to the exam, just remember, you're really trying to show the examiner that you understand that this play isn't about these two characters or any others. It's actually about us and making us think what we would do in this situation. So thank you very much for watching this video and goodbye.